Welcome to the Shepherd Hearted Leader podcast, where we explore topics that help strengthen your ability to care for those under your leadership. In today's episode, Pastor Nate sits down with Wayne Northup, the founding pastor of Saints Community Church in New Orleans. They talk about how he began in ministry and some of the challenges he's faced and how he's persevered. You do not want to miss this conversation.
I am so excited to have you on the Shepherd Hearted Leader podcast. This is Wayne Northup, a long time friend. I would consider you to be family.
Oh, yeah.
And so welcome, and I'm super excited to unpack your story. I think what you have to say today is going to be so helpful for leaders and people every position, even parents at home as they think about their own story. And so, Wayne, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your story. And you can start from the beginning, bro, because I'm a part of earlier stages. And
100%. Well, I'm super excited to be here, first of all. And Emmanuel is a part of our lives. It is home in many ways. And so I'll kind of walk through the connection with Emmanuel as I kind of open up my story. But Fort Wayne, Indiana, grew up, born and raised, and got saved when I was 17 out of a life of drugs and rebellion. I was kind of the punk teenager that every parent can understand and knows about. Parents prayed me in and had a radical youth pastor that changed my life. And man, I just skyrocketed for Jesus. Went to North Central University. North Central was a part of my journey, graduated from there. And as I was going to North Central, doing what God had called me to do, started to preach some and do some traveling and do a lot of street ministry and a lot of fun stuff at North Central. I kept hearing about Emmanuel Christian Center and this guy named Nate Ruch. And so you and I had our own kind of journey, and kind of the beginning of our friendship was real interesting. Yeah. And then as our friendship grew and developed, and then as I got married to Christy, we ended up in a situation, I don't know if you remember this, but we ended up in a situation where we had nowhere to live because of some things that unfolded. We were supposed to move to North Carolina, and that didn't work. And meanwhile, we're traveling and really thriving ministry-wise, but without a home. Yeah. And I remember the phone call where you were like, hey, we can at least give you a home. And so that was when Emmanuel really became a home for Christy and I. And then through a series of events, you kind of brought us on the youth staff. I think when you were the youth pastor.
Staff evangelist for JC's place.
Yes. And so I remember vividly, I was in a cubicle, and you moved me to an office. Not because I needed an office, but because all the admins that were in cubicles were annoyed with how loud I was. On the phone.
I don't think that was the reason, but if the shoe fits, I suppose.
There we go. So and then through a few other conversations and the way that God unpacked it, as you went to North Central, we ended up as staff evangelist at the church level for Emmanuel, and it's always been a home for Christy and I.
Yeah, so amazing, so many memories. And actually, in that story, our interesting backstory of you and me, I give you a lot of credit for our relationship today, because you were traveling around and you were a little confident, maybe cocky.
I would use the word cocky now.
And I was like, I'm not gonna kiss your feet, your ring or something like that. And you're like, well, why won't you have me preaching in the youth group? And I'm like, maybe someday, but I'm not sure if I like you. I think I said something like that, or trust you. And you initiated a lunch meeting.
I did.
And we went over to Applebee's by Northtown Mall and sat down, and I got the Fiesta Lime Chicken. And you asked me straight up, why don't you like me?
I remember.
And I said, well, this is why. And you remember that? Yes. I wasn't hiding anything.
Yes.
But you won me in that moment because you had the courage to not back away. And truly, that's where my respect for you grew, because I didn't have a lot of people who just say what they were thinking. And you were willing to do that, and my heart changed towards you that day. And then to watch over time, as you invested in people around the country, you're preaching, hearing the stories back from camps and conventions, and thousands upon thousands of kids being saved and baptized in the Holy Spirit, and
healed,
and then Christy and her ministry and worship, and it was unbelievable. Like, you're a preaching machine, bro, and
powerful days.
And then, of course, along the way was the backstory of New Orleans.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the story of New Orleans.
Yeah. So when I was at North Central, I was a junior at North Central, and the missions director, Dawn Corlew, called me in her office and said, hey, you've been chosen to go to New Orleans on this missions trip for colleges. You're going to represent North Central on this trip. And I was like, well, I mean, if I've been chosen, I mean, we already heard about how cocky I was. So like, if I've been chosen, I should say yes. Well, I found out later they'd asked 10 other people before me to represent the school that had all said no. So I get tricked into going to New Orleans, and went with my best friend down to New Orleans. Really, at that point in my life, all of my journey had been in the Midwest and up north. And so Indiana, Minnesota, I'm starting to do some traveling when I was in college, but not really outside of this region. And so, man, the South, New Orleans, that was a world I didn't know anything about. And so we get in the car, we get there, we get to New Orleans, make the long drive from Minneapolis, and my buddy and I are with a host, another college student that's hosting us. And he said, hey, I want to take you guys to the French Quarter to eat. I didn't even know what the French Quarter was. But I said, all right, that sounds like eating sounds like the Holy Spirit. So we start driving towards the French Quarter, and as we're driving, I start crying in the back seat of this car. I always say there are many settings, some settings where this is no big deal. Specifically for some ladies, this isn't but for three dudes, one of them that doesn't even know us, my best friend's even feeling awkward as I'm crying, and I don't know why I'm crying at this point. And I'm not like a little cry, like a sob. And I get out of the car, can't stop crying. We walk to the restaurant, can't stop crying, order food, tears streaming down my cheeks. And I finally said to those guys, because they were doing what guys do best when other guys cry, and that's ignore them. Yeah. And
look some other direction.
Yes.
Thing, yeah.
So I finally say to those guys, hey, I think either God's speaking to me or I'm having a nervous breakdown or something. I think I'm going to go to the car and just see what God wants to say. So, man, I could take you to the spot where that car was parked in New Orleans. And I remember slamming the car door shut and putting my head on the dashboard of the car and saying, God, what are you doing to me? And the Lord said, I'm just giving you a love for a city. And I spent 2.5 hours wailing in the car. That's the only sentence I heard from the Lord for 2.5 hours, giving you a love for a city. I spent that whole week on that missions trip in tears, and that started this journey of a relationship with the city of New Orleans. So we started taking missions teams down there to do outreaches. And
during Mardi Gras.
Yeah, during Mardi Gras. A lot of college students, North Central teams, Master's Commission teams, college teams. So we estimate around 5,000 young adults came through those outreaches, through the years. And so powerful times. Meanwhile, this relationship is just continuing to grow. And I do tell younger people, which is hard for me to think that I'm not included in that that word anymore. But I do tell them it wasn't God gave me the burden and I moved overnight. God gave me a burden, and my relationship with that burden grew for a lot of years before I pulled the trigger. And the Lord actually in 2010, he spoke, moved in 2011. And so you look at, I think it was 98. to 2011. That's a lot of years of things just being cooked, literally God just kind of baking the cake, a long process in the oven to get me ready, to get my wife and I and our family ready to move to New Orleans.
That's pretty crazy when you think about the development of the burden, the dream, the seed that was planted.
Yeah.
And it took years to grow.
Yeah.
You didn't rush it. I remember coming down to one of the outreaches.
Yep.
You had me come and speak, and God wrecked me in a good way.
I remember the sermon that you preached. As preachers, we don't remember a lot of what we even say, let alone others. But I specifically remember God was working in you.
Yeah.
And sometimes those best messages come out of what God's doing in you, and you speak that out. And it was powerful day.
And interesting that you're talking about the bigger picture of your journey. For me in that part, while I was preparing a message to give the leaders and pastors, God put something in me. But I was also beginning to leave Emmanuel as a youth pastor to go to North Central.
Yeah.
So it was pivotal for me. So your city had an impact on my life as well.
Yeah.
I love how God intersects. The kingdom's so much bigger than we are along the way. And so then you, in 2011, is when you guys moved into New Orleans to plant a church.
Plant a church. So God spoke to me at a big pastors conference with the Assemblies of God called General Council, and was listening to another evangelist preach, Herbert Cooper, friend of ours, and listening to him preach. And he had left the road full-time preaching to start a church. And in that service, God said, that's what I am ready for you to do. And so we, after, I think it was 14, 15 years of full-time, 46 weeks out of the year, travel, preaching, like we decided it's time to settle down, move to New Orleans. The burden had grown to the point where God was like, it's time for you to reach the city.
Wow.
So church planting for me was never like, I didn't have some big dream, church planting for some can be this like kind of thing that's growing in them. But for me, it was just, we literally just wanted to reach the city of New Orleans.
Wow.
So it was a geographical call. So,
and just real briefly, talk to me about how it was you and Christy.
Yes.
So it wasn't just you.
No.
But together you heard that call. How did you handle that together?
Yeah. So we actually had a conversation right after that service in the hotel room. And God had spoken to her in that service.
Wow.
And had been preparing her for that for quite a few months. And so that, not every conversation in marriage goes like that, but this one did. It was kind of like, I feel it. The Lord's in this. We're going to do it. I had no idea how important it was going to be for Christy and I to be 100% on the same page because of the struggles and the stuff that was coming our way in just literally a few months. And the fact that she was so on board and so called as well. And if you know Christy and I, we're a package deal. So you don't get one without the other. And I know one thing, you don't want me without her. She might be okay without me, but so literally like God speaking to her and then us coming together, that was one of the easier conversations that we had, but it was so vital.
Wow. Big change. You go into a city, it's post-Katrina. How many years?
So Katrina was 2005, so 6 years.
So the city, what was the city like when you went in?
Still broken. Still hurting. I'll say this, Nate, the recovery from Katrina still isn't whole.
Wow.
It's still broken. There's still parts of the city that are abandoned. There are still people that moved that will never come back. Some that are considering coming back. Katrina, it's like kind of, you say BC, AD. We say pre-Katrina, post-Katrina.
Wow.
It changed the city so much and broke the city so much to the point where really New Orleans has been in survival mode which has a whole lot of baggage that comes along with it, of like, I got to protect me and mine, and you know, and so I would say it's still not whole. It's better, but it's still not whole.
And the foundations of that city have spiritism, and a whole bunch of, from a religious standpoint,
100%,
an overlap of Catholicism 100%. With
the syncretism is huge.
Yeah.
So you're mixing voodoo and Catholic together.
Yeah.
You're mixing pure superstition together. There's not a week that goes by that somebody doesn't say something and then say, well, knock on wood. And they're not joking. Like they're 100%. So the superstition, the spiritism, the amount of witchcraft. I mean, Christy, as part of our church planning journey, worked at Starbucks for several months. She had other baristas at Starbucks that were witches. My daughter has gone to school with witches, and has like a witch generational passing down in their family. She's, by the way, led many of those to the Lord, and they're now awesome. Christ followers. But so that is a very common in our city, like where there's some places that like, man, there's a witch. Like you're going to meet those weekly.
So this wasn't planning a church in a suburb that's fast growing with all people that have some kind of Christian background.
Yes.
This was hard work.
Hard work.
So you're jumping into this kind of season post Katrina. And all that spiritual stuff. What happened when you got there?
So I'll just preface it with, we had no idea how easy ministry and life had been up to the point we started the church. It was just everything that we had touched had turned to gold. We were seeing, I mean, I was like sneezing in church services and 1,000 people were getting saved. It was just, it had been so easy, and surrounded by our best friends. We did move from Emmanuel to Dallas. And so we
Emmanuel
left.
South.
Yeah, that is literally, yes. We lived in a neighborhood called Harmony. Our best friends lived 3 houses down from us. Our other best friends lived down the street. It was just, we had no idea. And so we moved to New Orleans. I remember saying to Christy in our house in Harmony right before we moved, hey, you know what? If we're not quite 1,000 people by Easter, like it's okay. I just literally, I had no idea what was coming. And so, I think what's important as I kind of unpack that journey is I had no idea what the Lord needed to do in me. In turning me from a apostolic evangelist call. Those are my main gift sets of the fivefold. So I'm an apostle. I love to start things, and then I'm evangelist. So I love to see people saved. The Lord had to turn me into a shepherd. And so he allowed some things in my life to unpack. So a few months after we moved, I woke up one day and our launch was not exactly what I thought it was going to be. Things were not as easy as I thought they were going to be. We had 52 venues turn us down. So we had nowhere to meet. We had to push our launch date back. I resigned at one point in front of my leaders. I stood up and I said, hey, I just want you to know I really thought I was the guy to get us where we need to go to launch this church. But I stood up in front of 25 leaders at that point and said... You
must have been really down, huh?
Yeah, and I said, I'm going to resign as the lead pastor. I want to introduce you to our new lead pastor. His name is Jesus. And
I like that.
He's going to get us where we need to go. I'm going to be his associate pastor, and we're just going to follow him. And so that was the beginning of you ain't got it. This isn't going to be you, Wayne. This is going to be the Lord. And I thought that was bad. I thought that was 52 venues. This is hard. I had no idea what was coming. So woke up, we had started the church, and I woke up and couldn't breathe one day. I'd had mild asthma growing up, kind of sports related. If I overdid it, that type of thing, I'd have to have an inhaler. This was way different than that. We lived in a rental. I walked down the stairs that day, and I was so out of breath that I couldn't make it back up to the stairs, to the bedroom. And so it was a weird feeling, and I just sensed that day, this isn't normal, and this is going to be a thing. And So that turned into a 3-year health journey. And when I say health journey, it wasn't just a light thorn in my side. It was really a daily part of my life where I couldn't breathe. I started to get infections. Anything that was catchable, I caught. So in a 3-year time span, I had 14 bouts of pneumonia. I had staph infections. Literally just any kind of infection I was getting. New Orleans doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They knew something major was wrong. I spent almost a year with a PICC line that I had to carry around. And so I literally had to give myself drugs through like an IV PICC line every day. So I remember going on Sunday mornings and pulling, making sure I was wearing long sleeve to cover up the PICC line because I didn't want anybody to know. My leaders knew, but we didn't want to broadcast it.
Right.
When you're starting a church, like everybody wonders if it's going to make it anyway. So to know the pastor's really sick, I just felt like that was dangerous.
Right.
Yeah. So I spent 3 years, 12 operations. And so about 2.5 years into that journey, we started to realize like there's a chance I don't pull out of this. I had a doctor in New Orleans tell me, you need to move. You're allergic to the city. We think it's the molds that are here that are killing you. I'm pastoring the church from my bed, really for the better of almost 3 years. So
allergic to the city.
Allergic to the city
that God had called you to.
Yes. And I remember, I wasn't mad at the doctor, but I remember hearing the voice of the enemy speak through a man in that moment. And I remember just thinking to myself, if I die, I will die being obedient to the call of God. And my kids will remember Dad at least was obedient to the call.
Wow.
And walked out of that office. I did determine we may need to look at some doctors outside of New Orleans. And so I had a night where it's a revelatory kind of night. It was the culmination of 3 years of a health journey, a crisis. And we had just finished one of our Mardi Gras outreaches. I was like 104 fever, throwing up. It was kind of par for the course at that part of my life. And my wife had to go run some errands. She left our bedroom. And I remember when she walked out, the presence of the enemy coming in. And I'd only felt that kind of darkness one other time in my whole life. Literally felt the presence of the enemy. And as the darkness kind of walked in, and it wasn't anything I saw, it was everything that I felt in my spirit. I was so physically tired too, Nate, that my spiritual senses were weak. And the enemy just started whispering all these lies. You're going to die. You're going to leave your wife a widow. Your kids are going to grow up without a dad. You're not going to reach the city of New Orleans. And you should have never moved here. You know, all of the lies in like a 1 minute time span. And I asked God a question in that moment that I hadn't asked in almost 3 years. And to be honest, I was kind of proud of myself that I hadn't asked the question in 3 years. And I said, God, why? Why do you have to make it this hard? Why am I maybe going to die? Why am I having to have conversations with Christy about what to do with our family and with the church if I pass? And the Lord said, you know, Wayne, you've only ever known 50% of me. And I said, God, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you've only ever known the power of my resurrection. Welcome to the other half, the fellowship of my sufferings. And I realized in that moment, that conversation with the Lord, I realized a few things. Number one, I realized when I moved to New Orleans, I wasn't a shepherd. I wasn't really interested in walking with people through suffering. And I was interested in my agenda and what I felt like God had called us to, and that it really was looking at people like chess pieces that I needed to move around in a lot of ways to accomplish what we were called to. And I wasn't interested in making the hospital calls and getting in the ditch, in the dirt of people's lives and their souls. And I also realized that I was called to a suffering city, and I had never suffered. So how do you minister to a suffering city where 98% of the people in the city have PTSD and great trauma from their own suffering? And I want to walk in as an outsider with the big bad agenda I felt like God had called us to, and I'd never been through anything. So how am I going to minister to suffering people without suffering? And the third thing that I realized was that I wasn't as close to Jesus as I thought I was. And I've never been closer to Christ than I have since that time, because again, there was 50% of Jesus that I was missing. And so that relationship with Christ went to a whole different level.
Wow.
And that had nothing to do with me as a leader and as a pastor. That had everything to do with me and Jesus and what he wanted to do to bring me closer to him.
Wow.
Yeah.
So much in that, of course, and you could probably preach a year of sermons just about that aspect of it. All of us could. But what I'm interested in, even for the purposes of this podcast, leaders hearing that we all go through difficult seasons.
Yep.
Some of us have more dramatic pain and suffering than others.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter what that thing is. For each of us, we have our own cross to pick up and carry it. But what you're describing is what the suffering produced in you.
Right.
And it could have produced something else.
Yeah.
If you didn't accept what the Lord was saying to you.
Yeah.
And you became bitter, or you left New Orleans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you valued your own life above the sheep. Because Jesus said, a good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep.
Right.
So because you leaned into it, you wanted to know Jesus more in it, he was making you into a true shepherd in the line of Christ.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Not the celebrity pastor, Christian, not where everybody
all that
wants
died.
to buy it. It wasn't about that anymore.
Yeah.
It was about simply saying yes to Jesus. And as you did, something new came out of it. And I think that's what I hope happens with me, even as I age. I've got stories of my own suffering, my own journey, but those are old. Like, as I move forward, I want to know Jesus more, both sides.
Yes.
Right? And obviously, I'd rather not have suffering.
Right.
But what do I do with it when it happens?
Yeah.
It's not a sign that God hates me or that I did something wrong necessarily or as a result of my rebellion.
Yeah.
Sometimes as a leader, we're meant to heal wounded people
100%.
that we can't identify with if we have no wounds.
Yes.
And that's what you're saying.
100%.
Yeah, that's incredible. Let me ask a few questions related to this while we have time, because I think we could do like 3 podcasts in a row, just you and me. But in the interest of time, what would you say to people who are going through their suffering? How do they remain shepherd-hearted? What are the tensions in that? Is it what others say to you? Is it your fears?
Yeah.
What about with the family? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I didn't do everything perfect through that time of suffering. And so I'll probably give a couple answers. One's of like things I did okay, and other things that I'm like,
keep it real, bro.
Yeah. So, and that really is honestly, that statement right there is where I would start. Like, you need to keep it real. What I had always done is I had ministered to people out of my strengths. And I had not really had a season where I had ministered out of my weakness. And so when we are weak, the scripture got, his power is made perfect through our weakness. And so there really is not only a power that comes when you minister out of your suffering and out of your weakness, there's also a connection that happens with the sheep at a whole different level. When I stand up and say, I'm hurting, I'm suffering, I'm going through this, they can say, he's not perfect. He's one of us. And wow, Jesus is working in his life. Maybe he can do something in mine too.
That's
so
really good.
There's a different kind of connectivity. And I would say there were seasons, especially after that conversation with the Lord, I did better. But I'm actually not that proud of hiding the pick line. because I feel like sometimes as leaders, we need to roll up our sleeve and show them the pick line.
Roll your sleeve up.
Roll your sleeve up, show them the pick line. Show them you're going through something. And because I look back, pride and fear are the reasons I didn't want to show them the pick line.
Yeah.
So, I don't want people to know. And I remember saying things to Christy like, I can be sick. That doesn't mean I have to act sick. And nobody will know, I'm sick. Well, that's really like, a manly, thing to say. But I remember us being like, if you could just preach on Sunday mornings and act healthy, you can fall back into bed Sunday afternoon for the rest of the week and be sick. And so even some of that game that I played in the beginning of my suffering, I wouldn't do again. So I would encourage leaders, just show the weakness, Now, there's a line in that where you're not getting up and saying, woe is me.
Yeah, you're not a victim.
You're not. I'm not a victim. Yeah. I'm walking through something. God is giving me the strength to walk through.
That's good.
And you can walk through something. God can give you the strength to walk through. So I would start there and just be okay with ministering out of your weakness.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, even that phrase, not a victim. That doesn't mean you're not hurt.
Exactly.
And even people that have been abused have gone through, we're not saying, hey, stay in your abuse.
No.
Like if somebody's abusing you, that's not the kind of suffering that Jesus expects you to stay in.
Yeah.
I remember Pastor Denya's, because he was pretty blunt and kept it real.
Yes, he did.
On Sunday mornings when he would preach. And he would say if your husband is beating you or you're enduring abuse, then call the cops. So that's not being a victim mindset, right? Even though you have had those things happen to you, you're not in denial.
No.
And that's what you're saying. You're not in denial. And what has that done for your ability to pastor, to shepherd now the people that you're leading since?
I think sympathy is what we feel when we sympathy is what we do when we can't feel people's pain. Empathy is actually the ability to feel people's pain.
Wow.
And empathy only comes from two things: time with Jesus, because he feels everything, every amount of pain from anyone that's walking through it, and your own suffering. And so empathy kicks into play when you're suffering. And so the ability for somebody, even if it's not the exact same situation, you do know what pain feels like.
Yes.
And you do know what suffering feels like. So that ability to be able to just look at your people as a shepherd and say, I'm not here with all the answers. I'm not here to give you the verse of the day for your own suffering. I'm just here today to tell you I love you and I know what it's like to hurt. And I also know what it's like to let Jesus walk me through it.
So good. It's so good. And like I said, we could do several hours on this. Do want to end with what God has done in your church.
Yeah.
And Saints Community Church has been raised up. And it started in 2011.
Yes.
And yet God is doing great things.
Great things.
And talk a little bit about what God's doing in your church.
Yeah, amazing things. Part of ministering through suffering is you still have to be faithful.
Right. It's not optional.
No, you still have to do what you got to do, do the work, even if it's from your bed.
Yeah.
I still did the work.
Right.
And I also learned in that season to lean on my leaders in a way that I hadn't ever had to, because I had some emergency surgeries where I had to have people preach that I thought maybe they could preach, but I wasn't sure. And I didn't have an option.
Right.
So, so leaning on my leaders and then continuing to be faithful through the suffering. Suffering is not an excuse to exit. And so you still have to do what God's called you to do and be faithful to the journey. There's still some grit involved. It doesn't need to be your grit. It needs to be Jesus' grit through you, but you still got to be faithful. So we were faithful through all of that and continue to build the systems and do, all the right stuff and listen to the Lord, do what he called us to do. And so as we were faithful through that, God just started to move. He just started growing the church. We started in a gym We were there 4 years, set up and tear down. We'd start at 6 a.m., get done at 1 p.m. for one service for those 4 years. We had 23 people that were in the ditch that would die for us, literally. Even times we wanted to leave, we couldn't because they had given everything up.
Wow.
And so the team around us was amazing. So we leaned on them. And then we for $1 million, got into our first facility and started growing. And kids ministry started growing, and it just the numbers, which is not everything, but it's nice. It's a nice part to see the numbers growing. And then in 2020, January 2020, we merged. We actually adopted a legacy church there in New Orleans. We moved from an 8,000 square foot facility into a 32,000 square foot facility. We launched a second location several months before that. And so sent our A team out to launch our second location, and then merged in January 2020. We merged two churches in January of 2020. I also started a master's program in January. You remember January 2020? It was good. Yeah. Those were good times. And then you remember March of 2020? So COVID hits. And so we've just continued to thrive and continue to see God do amazing things, grow the church. We just broke through records on Easter a few weeks ago here in both of our locations, and we made it through Hurricane Ida. We had to completely gut a facility, our second location during Ida. They were with our Metairie location for 2.5 years, the first location, and but after we'd walk through what we'd walk through, you literally there's a sense of like, all right, bring it.
Yeah.
Because I know Jesus can walk us through anything. And so now we're 2 locations, thriving, talking about a third location.
Wow.
And so just super excited about what God's doing.
Well, I can say this as your friend, I'm super proud of you.
Thank you.
And Christy, I'm grateful as a pastor.
Yeah.
To watch how you've led, and you challenge me, bro, in such a big way. And then as a church family, Emmanuel, that you've been a part of this family. Yeah. We have a phrase we use here now, that people that were on our team that went somewhere else are alumni.
Yes.
And so you are Emmanuel alumni.
Yes.
And
I feel like I need a jersey.
There you go. We'll work on that. How about that? And we're just so proud and so grateful.
Thank you.
And cheering on Saints community.
Thank you.
We're fans, if you will. And then as a church, we're thankful for your investment and what you've done here at Emmanuel and continue to do through many different venues. Me and our relationship with you guys, but also people that have been sent out from here, become a part of your team. And just watching what God is doing in the bigger kingdom, you're really one of God's great heroes, and you are a true shepherd-hearted leader. Thank you, Wayne, for being on with us today.
Yeah, and I'll just close with saying thank you to Emmanuel. Thank you for being home. Thank you for sending us out. Thank you for giving through many times, giving to us, sending teams down to work with us on missions trips. Just thank you for being a respite, a home for us. Thank you to I call him my spiritual big brother, Pastor Nate, and everything he is in my life. We love you, Emmanuel, and we are so grateful that we get to be considered part of the team.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Love you.
Love you too, Ben.
Wow, so many things to just think about, how we can just continue to persevere even in the midst of suffering. When I think about Wayne's story, it definitely inspires me to keep on keeping on. Well, if you want more information about Wayne Northup, you can check out his website. I'll put a link in the description, as well as if you're a church and you're looking for some more support, we've got Emmanuel Family of Churches that we would love to give you more resources, and we'll put that link in the bio as well. Until next time, keep leading well.